Mom's working late, my sister texted. I'll pick you up after my class ends. Sure. I was sitting outside the public library. It was 9 p.m. and the library was closing. The last rays of the setting sun were sinking behind the buildings, letting shadows loom up from the bushes. What up to a minute ago had been a nice, warm, sunny spot on the big stone bench suddenly felt unsafe. I looked around, the hair on the back of my neck rising. It was a weekday but school was out for teacher conferences. I'd caught a ride into town with my mom so that I could drop job applications at different businesses. I was turning 15 in a couple of weeks, so I figured that I might as well earn money after school. It was either that, or ride the bus home, and sit around alone all evening. I liked my own company, but there was a point where even I bored myself. And I was scared of some thing I'd encountered near my house. Mom had been supposed to pick me up after her work ended at 6 p.m. She'd texted me earlier that she'd be late. She was an LPN and if staff was critically short, as it often was, she worked overtime, filling in where needed. Something extra bad had happened if she needed my sister to pick me up. Maybe go get a sub at Mike's. That stays open until midnight, my sister texted. She was at her college campus 45 minutes away, attending her night class. She attended day classes too, every day. Afterward she worked as a waitress at a place that was a block away from the college. Her night class didn't end until 10. She didn't add any cute emojis to the text, which meant she was tired and crabby. She had reason. She'd dated one guy most of her life, and they'd broken up a couple of months back. The feeling of being watched intensified. Normally I'd think my brain was being stupid by being all scared of the dark. But 2 months ago I'd come face to face with a real monster. Since then the primal reptilian part of my brain worked overtime studying shadows. Right now, it was telling me loudly that I was in danger. Some kind of predator was closing in. I needed to move, now, before the sun finished setting, and it became too dark for any helpful stranger to see me being dragged into the bushes. I popped the book I'd been reading into my pocket and started walking toward Mike's. I was suddenly pining for a Mike's sub, hoping that I lived long enough to eat one. Despite all my glancing around and listening as hard as I couldn't see or hear anyone. Or anything. I fast walked out of the library parking lot and turned down 4th Street. 4th was full of big oak trees whose roots were crumbling the cement sidewalks. It was also a short street, less than a block, that dead-ended in the high school parking lot. The parking lot was big, empty and badly lit. I quickly turned onto Cherry Lane. This put the old brick high school to my right and primrows of well-kept old houses to my left. Almost all of them had thick, impenetrable hedges that bloomed fragrantly with lilacs in the spring. Now, in the dark, they were a looming forest blocking me from seeing if anyone in the houses were home to help me. I'd thought the high school would feel safe because no one could sneak up and surprise me from my right. However, the school was 3 stories tall and blocked all the light, causing Cherry Lane to be nothing but one yawning dark shadow. I pressed my phone to my face like I was answering a phone call. Really, I said. You are worried about getting a B in your college class. Stop mooning about your stupid, cheating boyfriend and finish your homework if you want that A. While I fake-talked, I listened for any sounds behind me. I heard nothing. But would I hear anything? The creature I'd encountered had been fast. Supernatural kind of fast. I heard a noise, the tiniest crunch, like maybe a footfall half a block behind me. I looked over my shoulder. There was nothing I could see. My primitive tiny brain snaked its tongue out and smelled the air. It insisted something was back there, and it whispered, "Run." My big modern brain overruled it, telling my trembling limbs to continue walking as fast as possible. That running would lead any predator behind me to chase. Running would let it know that I knew I was prey. Mike's was 1 block over and 2 blocks down from the library. I couldn't cut through backyards or alleyways because the high school sucked up an entire block with parking lots and outbuildings and the big brick building itself. Most of that area was surrounded with a high chain link fence. I finally reached the edge of the school and turned onto 3rd Street, shooting a look back down Cherry Lane as I turned. My heart lurched at the sight of something big and dark, definitely moving down the street behind me. A light flashed and it took a couple of steps for me to realize that the dark shape was a car without the headlights on. The interior light had flashed as someone opened the passenger door to step inside. A car moving without headlights driven by one person, who had picked up another person, who had been creeping silently along behind me. I heard the car door carefully click shut, and the interior light went out. The car continued moving slowly toward me, still without headlights. And then I was far enough along 3rd Street for the high school to block my vision. I took off running, figuring that I had maybe 10 seconds before the car turned the corner after me. The 2 blocks in front of me were long and badly lit. I heard the car reach the corner then suddenly rev up, screeching tires. The prey was running. I was barely halfway down the first block. My problem was, I had a pizza-fed bubble of an arse, and that chunky thing just did not run fast. I adored it and every other bit of me that was attached to it though, and had no desire for any of those bits to be kidnapped. Or worse. I increased my speed while trying to dial 911. Why the hell hadn't I punched that in instead of fake talking? The car screeched to a stop beside me, and I heard the passenger door click open as I continued running. I added screaming to my running as heavy footsteps pounded after me. My arm was grabbed, yanking me around like I was the weight at the end of a tether. I used the momentum to come around and smash directly into the man, knocking us both off balance. I landed with my free elbow accidentally in his ribs, then my knee connected directly with his crotch in a far more planned movement. He gasped and lost control of my arm as he hunched into the fetal position. I stumbled back to my feet as the driver's door popped open. I screamed again and left the street, smashing through the nearest hedge like the Kool-Aid man. I ran through someone's backyard, jumping over abandoned toys, and screamed, hoping that the homeowner would open the door. The house was dark and there were no cars in the driveway. I continued running. There were no hedges between the first yard and the next, and a mostly dead hedge that snapped apart easily between that one and the 3rd yard. Where were all the homeowners? All the houses were dark and no cars were in sight. The guy that had been driving the car was now in the 2nd yard and swearing because he'd tripped over a bicycle. There was a big, huge, insane hedge between the 3rd yard and the 4th. I could see flickers of lights on in the house. I ran down the 3rd house's driveway back onto the street, hearing the driver close behind me. My breath wheezed in my throat, my legs felt heavy and wobbly, like I was thumping along on bags of wet cement. I ran up the 4th house's driveway, up the steps, with the driver clutching at my jacket. I turned the knob of the house and fell inside the door. The owner was walking from the kitchen to the living room, a bowl of popcorn in one hand, the TV remote in the other. He looked down at me and I looked up at him. Without a word, I crab walked out the door, backward, landing on the steps. I rolled over and tried pushing up with my arms to get up. The driver was directly in front of me, his eyes sliding upward past me to what was standing in the doorway. He made a meowing little sound and put his hands up in a pleading, stop gesture. Quickly he backwalked himself out of the driveway. I heard him run up the street. There were shouts between him and the first man. A car started and screeched away. I tried to haul myself to my feet and run, but I couldn't move my arms or legs. They were frozen, waiting for my breath to come. It didn't. It remained caught in my throat, refusing to go in or out. I tried to force my chest to expand, feeling my abdominal muscles clench until, finally, a tiny, loudly squealing, bit of air slowly wheezed out. It was just enough that I could take a tiny squealing bit of air back in. Then that became stuck. I panicked, trying to suck air in that wouldn't go in, blow air out that wouldn't go out. My face was burning, bubbles dripping out of my nose. My chest crushed in on itself so hard it felt like my muscles were tearing, my heart was grinding to paste. Then my asthma inhaler was taken out of my pocket, pressed into my mouth, and activated. I grabbed it, dropped it, my hands not working. They felt like big icy clubs that had no fingers. A hand that wasn't mine retrieved the inhaler and put it in my mouth again, holding it in place, activating it again. My airways relaxed enough to squeak out another embarrassingly loud bit of air, which allowed a fresh bit to enter. I managed to cup the inhaler between both hand clubs, feeling safer with it in my possession. I lay there on the steps, my wheezing, squealing breath rattling a dead leaf, as the medicine worked, opening my airways. Snot leaked down my face. My breath wheezed and groaned. My limbs finally came back to life, weirdly twitching and vibrating, but mostly back under my control. Slowly I sat up, trying to get my spine straight, to give my lungs room to expand. After a moment a bottle of lemonade appeared in my vision, and I gripped it out of reflex. The werewolf, now in human form, sat down on the steps beside me and popped his own lemonade open. "I see that you've kept busy," he said. "That's the first asthma attack I've had since I was 10, I said, inanely, carefully not looking at him. I twisted the lid off the lemonade, my fingers still clumsy and tingling, but amazing little things. My breath still wheezed and whistled. My chest hurt. I sipped the lemonade. "Did you know those guys?" the werewolf asked. I shook my head no. They saw me sitting by the library, so I started walking to Mike's. We sat quietly for a few more minutes. When I was sure my legs would hold me, I stood up. The werewolf stood up too. I finally looked at him. He wasn't looking at me. Instead he was looking down the street, turning his head slightly, his nose flaring softly, his head lifting as he smelled the air. It was the kind of gesture that you see your dog do all the time. You never see a human do it. "Thank you for, scaring those guys off." "And the drink," I said, walking down the steps, backward, carefully feeling for each step behind me. The werewolf stood at the top of the steps looking down at me, the shadows making his face look wolfish. Or maybe he was just becoming wolfish. "I'm so sorry, I know where you live," I blurted. He grunted, a low noise that ended in a growl. "Those guys are sitting in their car at the end of the block, looking back this way," he said. I stood at the bottom of the steps, unsure what to do. I glanced up the street. When I looked back, the werewolf was walking into his house, the door snapping closed behind him. I stared after him, panicked. I was afraid to stay where I was, but felt like there was a bubble of protection around the house. If what the werewolf said was true, the two guys were between me and Mike's. Then the door opened back up and the werewolf walked out, tugging a jacket on and dropping keys into his pocket. "You have someone picking you up from Mike's?" he asked. "My sister," I said slowly. I'd been riding with my sister when we'd first encountered him. She'd sort of accidentally ran him over. He gave me a pained look. "Why don't you just get a ride from your future brother-in-law?" "She didn't get back together with him," I said. Shocking. It was. None of us, including my sister's ex, had thought that it possible that she would remain unforgiving. It was a quiet walk. When we were halfway down the block, under a fairly bright swatch of street lights, I heard a car start and drive quickly away. The werewolf sniffed once in a while, pulling air in through his nose, each time lifting his head slightly, or cocking it to one side. Like he was following several different scents, teasing them out, pulling all the information there was to be found out of them before he released them again. He didn't tell me what he deduced from each sniff, but when we reached Mike's he looked at me. "Go inside and stay inside. Call the police and report this. It might save someone's life. Oh, and don't tell the police about me." His eyes glinted. He was holding the door, with me on one side of it and him on the other. The building and hedge formed shadows around him, and the glass obscured him with a glare. I watched through it as his human face melted and reformed into a monster. My stomach twisted and both my primal and modern brains quivered. Yes, Mr. Werewolf, I thought to myself. Message received. Then he wasn't there. I was standing there looking at him, and then there was nothing except a dark hedge. I blinked and looked around for a few seconds trying to spot him. I couldn't. So I finished stepping into Mike's, where the scent of pastrami rose around me, like a blanket.